Talk to Bob Bigelow, talk to people from A&S Research.
You're so right when you say these skeptics act like psychics, because they do have answers for everything without even looking at the data. They just seem to know what the answer is without anything. You had a little incident where you had the book that the skeptics use, which basically dismisses everything. Can we talk a little bit about that? And if it's okay with you, can we talk a bit about what happened with the History Channel?
Well, yes, I did a program which will go unnamed, but we gave them a specimen, which was a portion of one of the implant specimen materials, and they wanted me to take it to a place where I could have an exact piece cut to their specifications. So I did that, and it was a rectangle, certain measurement. And I found out the only place I could have this done was a lapidary. So I went to a lapidary, and he cut this thing exactly the way I wanted it. So the essence of the show was they showed certain things which they were able to prove negative, that they weren't what they thought they were. Certain things they couldn't make up their mind, and certain things which were positive, and so on. So this was one of the three. We'll come to find out that at the end of the show, the position they took on this object was negative. In other words, it wasn't what it was shown to be. So I was kind of taken aback about that, and I had my agent get in touch with them, and they found out that they had sent it to a fairly well-respected scientist at an unnamed university with a lot of good reputation, science department. And I got the name of the scientist, and I called him, and he said, well, I hope you're not upset about the results of the examination of the material that they showed on TV. I said, no. I said, you seem to be, a certainly reputable science, and I'm sure you did your homework and you reached that particular conclusion. But I was just wondering, some of the findings and so on. And he says, well, I hope you didn't mind. I just cut the little corner off the triangle. And I said, triangle? What triangle are you talking about? And he said, oh, a triangular piece of metal you sent me. And I said, but I didn't send you a triangular piece of metal. I sent you a rectangle of certain dimensions, which I gave him. Oh, no, that's not what I received. So, again, I got a hold of my agent, and I went, I should add this, that finally, a few weeks after the show aired, they sent me material back. But they made a heck of a mistake, because the piece that they supposedly sent me back was a triangle. But that wasn't what I gave them. They switched it. And so I had my agent call at that time the company and talk to the producer, and their answer was simply, we don't care, put in a different terminology.
Wow. So would you take that evidence of an actual cover-up of, what your findings?
No, it wasn't a cover-up. It was, I did, John has seen the film I did, which we're trying to get it, legally so we can sell it and air it. But when you go into Hollywood and, you look at all these things, and it has to do with the UFO phenomenon, all these skeptics and debunkers and lies and all sorts of stuff. But when you talk about even subjects like ghosts, you don't see them. And there's been no films, nothing released in video, DVD from Hollywood or anywhere else that I know of that has debunkers debunking God. You just don't see that. So we went kind of in and did an in-depth behind-the-scenes research project, And what we came out with was very simple. You're dealing with the entertainment business. They couldn't care less whether they're putting on something that's has basis in reality or doesn't, as long as it's entertaining and it makes money. It's very simple. It's quite simplistic.
It's a shame, because this is a serious subject. Now, one question I wanted to ask you is regarding going back to these implants is, have you found any pattern of who is actually putting these implants in people? And playing the devil's advocate, I don't believe this to be true. Is it possible that some of these implants were done by government people or humans?
Well, you can eliminate government because of several factors. One is that I've been, fortunately or unfortunately, in black budget laboratories. And when you find a bunch of scientists that are crowded into a room looking at this stuff under the electron microscope, and the director standing out in the hall with a hand on each hip because these guys are on a government payroll, and he's madder than hell. You know damn well that the black budget people don't have this. Another reason is I've had some dealings with a company recently, a very large one, that does black budget work for the government, but it's only about 20%. And 70% of their work is done for commercial development of advanced technology. That's run more like a university. And they told me, don't bring us a project that's 10 years in the future. Don't bring us a project that's 100 years in the future. If you bring us a project that's 1,000 years in the future, we'll take a look at your data. If we like it, we'll sponsor it. And you can stay there and work, and we'll pay you for 6 months. Then they reevaluate your data, and if it still looks good, then you could be there another 6 months, a year, 2 or 3 years, until they develop it into something that's commercially marketable. So we know that this material is not something that's being done by black budget science, which those who deal with black budget science say it could be at least 100 years ahead of academic science. And relative to the objects themselves and where they come from, we have a scientist, very well-respected nuclear physicist, which is on our board, Dr. Robert Kuntz. And he's looked at the isotopic ratios in these objects and determined that and he bases his calculations on the Big Bang. And to get the isotopes that we find in these objects, it's convertible through a constant into a galactic distance. And he said they come from at least 1/3 away across the Milky Way galaxy, and probably from a civilization that's at least 1 million years older than we are.
So do you have any idea are these being implants from abductees who have seen grays?
Well, when abductees talk about seeing grays, and when we look at the Cumbergus footage, which I was there while I was being shot in Turkey, and you see grays that are in the front of operating a craft, I mean, you know that grays involved, but who are grays? I mean, we look at people from China, Korea, other, various parts of the Orient, and to us, they all look Oriental. So we can say, we want to group all the Orientals into one bag? I don't think so. Maybe there's grays from, different portions of the universe or the multiverse.
Dr. Lear, do you remember in 1974, Sagan sent out a binary code basically describing where we're located in our galaxy, that we're carbon-based and all that, and what our size is, and we occupy the 3rd planet from the sun in our solar system. When we received back a signal, I think it was in 2001, 2004, I'm a little bit unsure.
Crop circle.
Yes, the crop circle stated that they occupy 3 planets in the Zeta Reticular star system. So wouldn't that fit perfectly with the grays looking a little differently, maybe the tall ones, the short ones, the skinny ones, because that's just 3 planets right there, and maybe they evolved a little bit differently, or I don't know if they started on one planet, moved to the other, but that just fits in perfectly with what other people are saying. Everything ties in.
Yeah, it does. And if you look at, it depends on who you believe and who you think is credible and who's non-credible and blah, 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 blah. But people like Dan Burrish, who I had grave doubts as to his authenticity until I met him and he invited me to a lecture at Caltech. Well, come to find out, John, as a legal person, you can't walk off the street and lecture at Caltech.
Dr. Lear, we seem to have gotten a caller, area code 623. Where are you calling from and what's your name?
I'm calling from Arizona. My name's Alex. I just want to listen in for right now. I'm calling from work. I'm not currently next to a computer, so if you guys don't mind.
Okay.
Muting out right now.
Questions for Dr. Lear or Preston or anybody?
Not at the moment, but because I just got in right now.
You can. Just keep your end on the quiet. And sorry about that, Dr. Lear. Let's go ahead and pick up where we were going with Dr. Dan Burrish.
Yes, as I said, he invited me to a lecture he gave at Caltech, and I did some research on what you have to do to lecture at Caltech. And you can't just walk off of the street and walk in there. It's quite a process you got to go through. So I was very impressed with that, and the fact that when he was introduced by an Indian professor of physics, the first thing that was said was, "I'd like to thank the United States Department of Defense and Dr. Dan Burrish for appearing here today." And this was all filmed, and I was impressed. And then he volunteered to actually help me do some research. So I gave him some material, and within a month I got a report back. That was probably the finest piece of scientific investigation that I've had turn out. I would say it was even better than what Los Alamos or New Mexico Tech produced.
When Bob Lazar came out in the late 80s, and he was received with a lot of ridicule, but I believed him, and then they said they couldn't find his record, they couldn't find this. Well, George Knapp uncovered a Los Alamos directory with him in it, which obviously, if you work at Los Alamos, you obviously, as a scientist, not a janitor, you more than presumably have a decent degree from a good place. And this just goes to show how easy it is for them to cover it up. But when Dan Burrish came out, he actually was able to corroborate a lot of Bob Lazar's story. And, of course, expand on it with the work that he did with the J-Rod in S4. And I think that they both corroborated each other, and that's what I think makes Mr. Burrish or Dr. Burrish very credible. I saw several of his interviews, hours combined. He goes into serious detail of everything he works in. I honestly think he's the real McCoy as well.
Oh, I spent some time initially with him because, as I said, I had no faith in his story whatsoever. And I kind of buttonholed him at a conference, and he invited me backstage, and I asked him very specific medical questions. And he was right on. I mean, he was absolutely exacting. There was hems, haws, or buts about the answer. But I want to return this to the subject of the grays. The J-Rods were grays. Bob Lazar talked about grays at Area 51. So are they the same grays? Now Burrish says the grays are us in the distant future. Who knows, for example, whether the civilization that was on Mars before their astronomical calamity occurred were not us in the form of grays.
Yeah, so, you're right. He says that the crash in Roswell was actually the grays where we involved of living underground for 52,000 years as basically with bigger heads because of our higher intellect, large eyes to see in dark circumstances, and smaller body because the technology didn't need so much manual labor in the sense. And he said the reason why there was a discrepancy with the Nordics and the Greys is the ones that stayed above ground and kept the human features versus the ones that went below ground and then went to the moon and then to Mars and then to reticuli, I think just kind of fits if we took humans, put them underground 50,000 years later, wouldn't you think that they would look a little bit like that? I think in some ways it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does. There's a rationale for that. Plus the fact that how do we know, looking at the vastness of the universe, and if civilizations reside on planets such as ours, how many of them are really surface dwellers and how many of them are subterranean? Archean dwellers, because if you look at the planetary geology, and planets are in a constant state of flux with the mantle moving, and those that have iron cores, that cause changes in the molten plasticity of the tectonic plates. Maybe it's a lot safer to live underground than it is on the surface. So I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there was a lot more subsurface dwellers than there are surface dwellers.
Roger, I'd like to ask you a question. Your books are amazing, Alien Implants and the Alien Scalpel, but I have to tell you, your book, UFO Crash in Brazil, is also really an incredible piece of research. And you're a rare bird. You're, someone with scientific training who does more than, armchair research, actually goes out into the field and does first-hand interviews and does real research. And I'd love to hear about your research into the UFO crash in Brazil.
Well, that was a case that happened fairly recently in 1996, very much like Roswell, except with the Roswell case, there was more emphasis placed on the crash of a vehicle or vehicles. Incidentally, there's new information on that that's out on the internet the last 2 days. As far as I know, it was Bruce Maccabee who was able to get a FOIA document from the FBI, of all places, dated 51, that stated there were 3 crashes in Roswell.
With 3 bodies in that. While I gotta say this, Dr. Lear Preston, we seem to have a caller. Caller, area code 604. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, this is SJ. I'm calling from the West Coast.
Oh, excellent. You have any questions for Dr. Lear? Anything you want to chime in about the show today?
Yeah, I want to clear up a little bit of confusion first in the chat. Are we speaking with John Lear?
No. This is Dr. Roger Lear.
Oh, hi, Roger.
Hi.
Thank you for coming on.
John Lear. He's LEA, I'm LEI.
Ah, good. So we had a little bit of confusion there. No questions per se. I'm delighted that you're doing us the service of talking with us, and that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, SJ.
Thank you for calling in, and I appreciate all our callers because the intent of doing these radio shows, as we all agree, is to try and wake up the population of the world. That's why the citizens hearing is going to be very important. Whether CNN or ABC or NBC shows up is really superfluous, because it's going to be streamed live out to millions of people all over the world. So that's the intent. But going back to Preston's comment about the Varkenia case, yes, there was more emphasis placed on the crash of the vehicle or vehicles in the Roswell case, but in Varkenia there was more emphasis placed on the occupants who were seen around town following the crash, and it involved 3 branches of the military. One was the Brazilian Army. The other was the fire department, which in Brazil is a military unit. And the third was the military police, which is a separate unit. But the extent of the research that I did down there when I arrived in Virginia, which is only maybe about 130,000 people, it's a small agricultural town in the state of Minas Gerais, which is mid-northern Brazil. The bottom portion of the southern portion of the state is very lush with agriculture, and the northern portion of the state is where all the jewels, all the precious stones come from. So it's a state with varying terrain, from lush growth to areas which get little or no rainfall. It was almost gray. But the incident occurred in the southern part of the state, as I said, cultural area. But the plane landed, and I was with a couple of other people who were there to document this and do filming. And we were met coming down the stairs of the plane by a group of people, one of which spoke fluent English, and introduced me to the mayor of Brazil, the mayor of Virginia.
Wow.
and I was absolutely flabbergasted that a mayor of any place would want to come out and meet me. So he did, and they treated me like I was a political potentate from somewhere. Gathered my bags, rushed us in a limo to the hotel, and I had dinner that night, and then the following day we started our investigation, and some witnesses came forth only because they knew I was a doctor, not because they wanted to give testimony to the case, but because I was a doctor, they hold physicians in higher esteem there, unfortunately, more than they do here today. But
Doc, I got an important question to ask you. You know, you sit on 16 smoking guns, right? And we've known that for 15 years, 17 or 18 now, the media has had every opportunity to come and touch on this subject, yet they haven't. And obviously, because of some censorship, we're worrying about that it's not going to be released in the U.S. Do you think if Brazil discloses that this will force the U.S. to disclose?
Absolutely. The purpose of, the meetings that we have at Just Cause with the ET Media Group is to try and get, number one, Hollywood to start producing films which are more realistically based on the UFO subject instead of these monster films where everybody gets eaten up and they spend $200 or $300 million and wind up losing $200 million. But Steve Bassett, who heads this up, said that a mistake was recently made by Obama, and he's going to use it. And that was Obama was asked, whether we've had any extraterrestrial contact, and he said absolutely not. That we don't know of any life anywhere else in the universe, extraterrestrial life, and none has ever visited here. So Steve said it's like a big chess game. Now he's going to use that and hit him over the head with it, so to speak.
I hope to God that it wakes people up finally and this disclosure will actually start to happen. And it seems from what you told me that Brazil is far more receptive. The civilians and the people who live there, the citizens, don't have the doubts that the U.S. citizens have. The mayor wanted to meet you because he knows how important of a figure you are. The people in the Virginia, Brazil crash were eager to speak to you. And then, do you think it was the U.S. that covered up their crash? How did that work out?
Well, let me tell you. I'll be out with a new book in a couple of months. And I go, again, back to the Virginia case, and I talked about what's happened within the last year. And there's some very strange things that have happened, which you can only say that it happened by design because of probably external influence over the Virginia, Brazil populations. But you got to remember that the situation is different in Brazil than it is here. In the first place, Brazil is now energy independent. It doesn't need anything from anywhere or any other country. In fact, it's supplying other countries, whether it's oil or ethanol or whatever. It's a country which grows, non-GMO crops. The food is absolutely excellent. Their standard of living, although it's a 4-tiered standard of living, is still pretty good for the average person. So they're a bit of a renegade. It's one of the few places in the world where you can pick up a guidebook and they'll tell you where to go see UFOs. If anything UFO-wise happens, it appears in the paper, in the newspapers. It's not like here. So if Brazil was a country that would disclose, it would have quite a few ramifications because I have documents that were signed between when Golden was the head of NASA with the Brazilian Space Agency, said that all material non-terrestrial material coming from Brazil would be turned over to the United States, but that the United States was 50-50 with the commercial development of this with Brazil. Well, what happened was they never did. And I think that one of the indications, one of the Brazilian responses, was the calling of A.J. Javard and 4 or 5 other noted UFO researchers to Brasilia, and they had the meeting with the Brazilian Air Force, and they released over 2,000 documents. Now, I have those 2,000 documents, and they are absolutely fantastic drawings and photos of stuff that has been going on in Brazil. But AJ said that's the top of the iceberg. But the Barquinha case, as I said, there was some great stuff that of world interest that went on there. That you can still find it on the internet. But I interviewed the 3 girls who were witnesses to one of the ETs. I interviewed their mother, grandmother. I interviewed the wife of the deceased military police officer, a young fellow who was about 25 years of age with the name of Marco Eli Charese. He had saw one of these ETs trying to cross the street, realized that he was injured, went over to him. He gave no resistance. He guided him back to another very small vehicle with one other driver and put him on his lap. No protective gear, no face mask, no gloves, no nothing. He put him on his lap, and they took him to a first aid station. And a first aid station in Brazil is very primitive. They said they're basically not even set up to treat an animal, more or less a human being. They're for very minor things. And from there, they went to a hospital called Hospital Regional, which is in the city of Barquinha. And there was a large contingent of military, but they didn't think that was unusual either, because there was a base that was nearby, and whenever there was an accident or a medical urgency, they came in large numbers to the hospital. But to make a long story short, this ET was forced to, I should say an orthopedic surgeon on the staff was forced to operate on a fractured leg on this ET, and I interviewed him also, and it's in the book UFO Crash in Brazil. Quite an emotional situation.
Doctor, do you know how many crash and retrievals there have been in Brazil?
I know there's been a few. There may have been more. I don't know how many of them were done by the Brazilian authorities, but I do know that all material from the Varginha case was eventually taken to Sao Paulo and loaded onto a C-5 U.S. Military transport plane and taken back to unknown area in the United States. But as to whether they've done their own crash retrievals, I suspect that they probably have. There's a lot of things about Brazil that are not made public knowledge. There's probably more pyramids in Brazil than there is certainly in Giza, Egypt, or in Central America. And these pyramids, one of them is larger than Cheops, but they're well guarded by the Brazilian government. No one is allowed in there. They're covered with vegetation. They've never been excavated. So there's a long history of ancient artifacts that are in Brazil, as there is in Peru and some of the other South American countries.
In your research into, not only the Brazil crash, but alien implants, did you ever receive any interference from, I'm going to say government or whoever is, actively covering this stuff up and holding the wreckage of the bodies and so on?
The only one I've had was locally within the state of California, where I came out with my first book, whatever year that was, and the medical board trumped up a case against me with a patient who had been deceased for 10 years. and he died of some other causes. And I had performed a surgery on him, and he came down with a post-op infection and was responding well, and he got into the hands of another doctor who put him in the hospital, and they wound up, I think, with an amputation. But 10 years went by, and I think he died of a heart attack or something else, and they went back and trumped up a case for me. But when I went to the office and the guy left the room, I kind of rummaged through his desk with a pencil, and I guess what was laying on his desk was a copy of my book. So.
Oh, really?
Wow.
So I had to do my penance, and the only time they came back to me after that was the use of the word doctor. They didn't like me using doctor because I could be confused with a general physician. So I didn't put the qualifier, but that had nothing to do with me. I've done, a few thousand hours of radio and at least 1,000 hours of television, and they refer to you however they want to refer to you. So it's not under my control at all.
Doc, I had two things I wanted to say. First, have you heard about that case that happened in I think it was the early 70s in Mexico? Apparently there was something coming from space, just like with this Brazil crash, where NORAD found this object and assumed it was going to Mexico, possibly Texas, and then they alerted the Mexican authorities. Apparently it crashed into a civilian plane. The Mexicans said nothing happened. We decided, as the U.S., the government decided to send a force down in there anyway, a crash and retrieval team. When they got there, they found all the alien bodies dead. You recall that case?
Yeah, I think was that the Aztec case?
Chihuahua, if I'm not mistaken.
Chihuahua, yeah.
Yeah. And that fits in a little line. I drew a little similarity with this Brazil case because the people died with exposure to these beings, right?
Well, there's several stories about that. Some say they were murdered on the spot.
Well, we do know, according from what A.J. Guevara was able to talk when he talked about these colonel, I don't remember what his last name was, but the colonel that was in charge of Project Saucer, when there was this invasion of these over a few month period where these objects kept coming in this little island off Brazil, and they were.
That's the 1957 case on the island of Colares.
Yes, that's the one.
What's called the Chupa Chupa case.
That's the one. And that guy, they said he was found after he, just not too long after he gave the interview to A.J. Guevara, he actually was found dead of suicide, they say. But many of us question whether it was suicide or looked.
No, it was definitely suicide.
Oh.
He had become, and it wasn't exactly right after. He had retired from the military, and it was several years later, but he obviously couldn't cope with what happened to him, and evidently not his close friends not believing his story. He became very depressed, and it was definitely a suicide. It's much, a lot of things happen to abductees in which result in suicide, alcoholism, drug, narcotics. They confined to mental institutions because they can't handle it.
Well, that brings up a question: is how do patients react when they find out they actually have these implants in them that are not natural and appear to be, actual? I mean, this is smoking gun proof, particularly for them since they're going through it.
Well, it places them in a very precarious psychological position, and that's why they're psychologically examined before we do any surgery. We want to know whether they're stable, and then we ask them, are you sure you want this out? Because if it is proof, that you were handled by extraterrestrials, you're going to have to live with that. Many of them will oscillate back and forth saying, oh, that's nonsense. I just had bad dreams. oh yeah, there's something in there, but I must have gotten it in, when I was a child and didn't remember. And then they get through life. Well, those individuals really shouldn't be operated on, because I always tell them that their life could be worse afterward than it was before. But the ones that we have removed objects from, we've had two of them tell the psychologists almost exactly the same thing, that they had newfound feeling of freedom. And physiologically, we've had most of them feel better with the object gone than when it was there. We had one case of a military intelligence officer that weighed about 200 and some odd pounds when he entered the military, and then he blamed the military for exposing him to some ET technology, wound up with an implanted device, and when he was discharged from the military, he weighed 80 pounds. That was in very poor health. Well, after the object was removed, he started to gain weight and felt better. So, we've never seen anybody worse off following an extraction than they were before.
Dr. Lear, have you had anybody that you've removed an implant come to you and say that they were taken again and another implant has been inserted?
Well, we've had a large percentage of them that are continually abducted, but so far there's been no further sign of reimplantation, which I find very unusual, because I was asked many times, who else in the world is doing what you do? And I can't answer that. I don't know of anybody that's doing. And I did, before I ever started doing this, even though I thought it was a comedic joke, I wanted to see, if anybody else had done anything like this. And I looked through the literature, and there had been people who had taken things out and they turned to powder, disappeared, or whatever. Whitley Strieber, years before I got involved in the field, was operated on by a Dr. Lerma in Texas, because he had an implant in his ear, and he opened it up and grabbed a whole little piece of it and was able to get it, but the rest of it moved out of the way, and he got so scared that he just took suture material and closed it up. So that's it, buddy. I don't want any more to do with this. So
I've had a lot of abductees tell me that they've gone to doctors, and the doctors have become very upset when the abductees tell them, well, no, I haven't had surgery, because the doctor is pointing to, various scars or, even objects in their body, and cannot explain them. So this is a challenge, I think, not only for the abductees, but for, people like you.
Yeah, well, that's, I guess I get them because, they come to me. Now, we get thousands of contacts, but it's only about 10% that are possible candidates for surgery, and then when you narrow that down, it's only about 1% of the 10% that are individuals that you want to perform a surgery on. We set up a really strict set of criteria and protocols for doing these cases, and we have to do that because we want this pure science. That's the same way we treat the specimens. We treat it as if it was, a murder case or, physical evidence of a crime scene. Once they're confined in the container, they're sealed and signed. It's never opened again unless there's witnesses or it's photographed or videoed. So we try and protect them even when they go to a laboratory. The laboratory technician has to sign a document stating that he's receiving the specimen in a container that's sealed with such and such a signature, and they're opening the container on such and such a date at such and such a time for a specific purpose, EDX testing or SEMs or whatever.
And that's the absolute best way to do it, because you're actually covering your bases. Hey, gentlemen, we're going to have one more caller shortly. Blake Cousins will be joining us, but the show's going to end in about 8 minutes. I wanted to use this time real quick, Dr. Lear, to let everybody know that you can find all his amazing books, especially that one that's coming soon will be on his website. It's alienscalpel.com. Again, alienscalpel.com. Find Dr. Lear's website. You'll find a whole bunch of information. And while we're on the topic of websites, I also want to mention Preston's. PrestonDennett.com. DENNETT. There you'll see his library of books too. So all you listeners out there, be sure and check out both websites. Find amazing books on them both. You know, as we're coming down to the last few minutes of this time, I think if we had to summarize everything into, you know, we've had a great almost 2-hour talk of talking about these otherworldly specimens that have come from 16 different surgeries, which have been to the top of the cream of the laboratories have tested these things. What else do you think it's going to take to wake the people up, Doctor?
Well, I think that if everybody participated in some activity towards that goal, people would be waking up faster than they are. For example, you just mentioned Preston's website and Preston's books. I mean, he's got a lot of books out there, folks. Buy one of his books, and just buy one and give it away to somebody else for a birthday or an anniversary or you know, Christmas or whatever. Take any of the reputable researchers, you know, get some DVD or video or a book or whatever, purchase it and give it to just one other person. And that person will do the same, and it'll help, you know, get the word out. Plus the fact that folks like John, you're helping to wake the world up, wake people up to the actual ET reality because of the radio show. So I noticed as of late there are numerous, you know, new radio shows, more people talking about it. And the more people talk about it, you don't have to ask a younger person, do you think there's other life in the universe? Because you know their answer. They're going to say, well, yes, of course.
You know, it seems here we have another caller coming in. I believe this is the Ivy West. Welcome to Revolution Radio.
Hello. I have been
Well,
listening.
hello there, Ivy.
Hi, Dr. Lear. What a great show. I even learned a few things that I hadn't heard you talk about before. And you're one of the world's foremost alien implant removal surgeons, and I think it's by default you're a podiatrist. And, you know, it just happened that you had people come along that had, you know, accidentally found these things in them and removed them to find out what they were. And, you know, you're doing a wonderful service. And if anybody can help Dr. Lear, please donate to him. You can go to his website, alienscalpel.com. He's got a huge research team, and your donations would really help further this research along. And that's one of the things that you can do for Dr. Lear. And I'm sorry, but I really wanted to come in and let people know that there is ways they can help. If they can't help in some other ways, they can help the research go on, because I know you have some more projects, and the last removal that you did, you found out on there that signal was the only signal that was into the astronauts in NASA is pretty significant, don't you think?
Oh, I think so, and I thank you for a recommendation for research donations, and I just want to bring up the point that A&S Research, who was responsible for the extractions and all the research on both the biological and metallurgical materials, we don't charge a penny to anybody to have anything done. So, you know, we can't many times afford, if you're in Hong Kong, to bring it to the United States. But, if you can get here, as I said, there are no charges made for any of our services.
You know, let me add into what Ivy and Dr. Lear just said. The research, folks, is very expensive. If you notice, these Dr. Lear, his team, they do this pro bono, but still there are costs that we can't avoid, and it's very, very expensive. So any donations that can be made to further this research, to further another implant removal, would be great.
Also, anything that they purchase from the website store is not really a purchase. It's a donation to ANS Research, and they're just being rewarded with the item that they select. So it's totally tax deductible because it's a 501c3. So you're not really purchasing anything from ANS. It's just you're making a donation and you're choosing the product that you would like to receive.
Wow, that's really nice that you allow that. So you actually get something for your donation, a memento, something to show that you're contributing, and just to keep the research going and all. And John, you're doing a fantastic job too there. I know you folks had some problems earlier, but you guys hung in there and got it straightened out. So it was very, very good.
We know what that's like, don't we, Ivy?
Oh boy, that's for sure. We have the same problem with Professor Searle back twice now, a couple weeks back. But we're going to get things straightened out here. And folks, you're listening to one of the radio stations, one of the newest and upcoming radio talk show hosts. And, of course, Dr. Lear has been with us for many years doing this research. And, you know, we really, really do need to support the station. We need to support the researchers out there, because the government is cracking down more and more, not allowing this research to get out. And or they'll just debunk it. They have so many people coming along to try and debunk this, and it's real.
Third phase of moon.